The woman collapsed 3 feet from his porch. Tarek Sable heard the thud from inside the barn and knew before he even turned that someone had fallen. Out here, that sound meant one thing: the desert had won again. He crossed the dusty yard in 4 long strides and found her face down in the dirt, a boy no older than 7 clinging to her skirt and sobbing. Both were bone-thin, sun-scorched, and utterly done. Tarek stood over them, jaw tight, already regretting what he was about to do. He'd buried kindness 3 years ago with his wife. But the boy looked up at him with his mother's desperate eyes, and something inside Tarek Sable cracked open despite itself. If you want to see how far a story about second chances and broken families can reach, drop a comment with your city below. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The Arizona Territory didn't forgive mistakes. It was a truth Tarek Sable had learned the hard way, carved into him the same way the wind carves stone, slowly, relentlessly, until there was nothing soft left. He stood now in the doorway of his barn, watching the afternoon heat shimmer across the scrubland like something alive, something hunting. The ranch stretched out before him in shades of brown and gold, stubborn mesquite trees clinging to life in soil that had no business supporting anything at all. His daughter's laughter drifted from somewhere near the chicken coop, high and bright against the silence. Lila. 6 years old and the only good thing the desert hadn't managed to take from him yet. Tarek pulled his hat lower and turned back to the saddle he'd been mending. Leather and silence. That was what his life had become. He preferred it that way. Then he heard the sound. It wasn't loud, just a soft collapse, like a feed sack dropping. But out here, every sound had meaning. Tarek's hands stilled on the saddle. He listened. Nothing. Then, faint as a whisper, a child's sob. He was moving before he decided to move. The sun hit him like a fist when he stepped into the yard. 98 degrees at least, maybe more. The kind of heat that made men stupid, made them see things that weren't there. But the woman lying face down in his dirt was real enough. So was the boy kneeling beside her, shaking her shoulder with small, desperate hands. "Mama," the boy was saying. "Mama, please." Tarek stopped 6 feet away, his shadow falling across them both. The woman didn't move. The boy looked up, and Tarek saw fear flash across his face, the kind of fear that came from learning too young that the world was full of men who hurt instead of helped. "Easy," Tarek said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy didn't look convinced, but he didn't run either. Couldn't, probably. He looked about as done as his mother, all sharp angles and hollow eyes. Tarek crouched down, careful to keep his distance, and studied the woman. Her dress was torn, sun-faded to the color of old bone. Her dark hair was matted with dust, but she was breathing, shallow but steady. Heat exhaustion. Maybe worse. "How long you been walking?" Tarek asked the boy. The child's lips moved, but no sound came out. His face was the color of ash beneath the dirt. Tarek swore under his breath and stood. He could leave them. Should leave them, probably. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, too. Get involved. Get hurt. The desert didn't reward kindness, and neither did the people who wandered through it. But even as he thought it, he knew he wasn't going to walk away. Not from a child who looked like that. Not from a woman who'd collapsed on his land trying to keep that child alive. "Lila!" he called. His daughter appeared around the corner of the house, her sun-bleached braids bouncing. She stopped when she saw the strangers, her eyes going wide. "Go inside," Tarek said. "Bring me the water barrel and some clean rags. Fast." Lila hesitated only a second before she ran. Tarek turned back to the woman and the boy. "Can you stand?" he asked the child. The boy shook his head. "All right, I'm going to pick you up. Don't fight me." He lifted the boy first, lighter than he should be, lighter than Lila even, and carried him to the shade of the porch. The child didn't struggle, but Tarek felt him trembling. He set him down gently against the wall, then went back for the woman. She was heavier, but not by much. Tarek got his arms under her shoulders and knees and lifted her as carefully as he could. Her head lolled against his chest, and he caught the faint smell of sage and sweat, and something underneath that reminded him, unbidden, of the way his wife used to smell after a day's work. He pushed the thought away and carried her to the porch. Lila came running with the water barrel, sloshing half of it onto the ground in her hurry. Tarek took the ladle she offered and held it to the boy's lips. "Slow," he said. "Not too much at once." The boy drank like he'd been wandering the desert for days. He probably had. Tarek wet one of the rags and pressed it to the woman's forehead. Her eyelids flickered. He waited. After a moment, they opened, dark brown, almost black, and filled with confusion that sharpened quickly into panic. "Easy," Tarek said again. "You're safe. You collapsed in my yard." The woman's gaze darted past him to the boy. "Owen? He's right here, drinking water. He's all right." She tried to sit up, but Tarek put a hand on her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Don't. You need to rest." "We can't." She stopped, her breath hitching. "We can't stay. I'm sorry. We were just passing through." "Passing through to where?" She didn't answer. Tarek studied her face and saw the truth written there. Nowhere. They had nowhere to go. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman hesitated, then said, "Mara. Mara Bell. I'm Tarek Sable. This is my daughter Lila." He nodded toward the girl, who was staring at Owen with the kind of fascination children reserve for unexpected visitors. "How long since you ate?" Mara's jaw tightened. "I don't need charity." "Didn't ask if you needed it. Asked how long since you ate." She looked away. 2 days. Tarek stood and turned to Lila. "Go get some bread and cheese from the pantry, and the stew from last night if there's any left." "Yes, Papa." Lila disappeared into the house. Tarek looked down at Mara, who was still trying to sit up despite the fact that she looked ready to collapse again. Stubborn. He recognized that quality, saw it in himself every morning when he forced himself out of bed to face another day alone. "I'll give you food," he said, "and a place to sleep tonight. After that, we'll see." "I can't pay you." "Didn't ask you to." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Why would you help us?" It was a fair question. Tarek didn't have a good answer. He looked at Owen, who was watching him with the same wary hope he'd seen in wild animals that didn't know whether to run or trust. He thought about Lila, who hadn't had another child to play with in over a year. He thought about the silence that filled his house every night, heavy as stone. "Because you need it," he said finally, "and because I've got it to give." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. Yum. Lila brought the food, and Tarek watched Mara and Owen eat with the kind of desperate control that spoke of long practice. They didn't wolf it down. They ate slowly, carefully, making it last. But their hands shook, and their eyes stayed fixed on the plates like they were afraid the food might vanish if they looked away. When they were finished, Tarek showed them to the small room off the kitchen that he used for storage. It wasn't much, a narrow bed, a single window, dust thick on every surface, but it was cool and dark, and Mara's shoulders sagged with relief when she saw it. "Just for tonight," she said. Tarek nodded. Just for tonight. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He'd seen the way Owen looked at Lila, the way Mara's hand had lingered on the doorframe like she was memorizing the feel of solid wood under her fingers. They had nowhere else to go, and he wasn't the kind of man who could turn them out knowing that. He left them to rest and went back outside. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Tarek stood in the yard and looked at his ranch, the barn, the house, the scrubland stretching away in every direction, and felt something shift inside him, small but unmistakable. For 3 years, this place had been a tomb, a monument to everything he'd lost. But now there were strangers sleeping in his house, and his daughter was humming in the kitchen, and the silence didn't feel quite so heavy anymore. It scared him more than he wanted to admit. Mara woke to the sound of voices. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd slept on in months, and the room was cool and dark. Then memory flooded back. The endless walking, the sun beating down, the moment when her legs had finally given out and she'd fallen. And the man, Tarek. She sat up slowly, her head still pounding. Owen was asleep beside her, curled into a tight ball, his face peaceful for the first time in days. Mara brushed the hair back from his forehead and felt her throat tighten. She'd almost lost him. Another day, maybe 2, and they both would have died out there. The voices came again, clearer now, a man's deep rumble and a child's bright chatter. Mara stood on shaky legs and moved to the window. The yard was washed in the golden light of late afternoon. Tarek was near the barn, working on something she couldn't see, while Lila sat on an upturned bucket nearby, talking his ear off. The girl's voice carried through the still air, full of questions and observations, and the kind of boundless energy that only children possessed. Tarek answered her in short, measured sentences, but Mara could hear the patience in his voice, the care. This was a man who loved his daughter, even if he didn't say it out loud. Mara leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She'd learned long ago not to trust kindness. Kindness always came with a price, a hand that wanted something in return, a voice that turned cruel when you couldn't give it. But Tarek hadn't asked for anything, hadn't even asked where they'd come from or where they were going. He'd just given them water, food, shelter, no conditions. It made her more uneasy than cruelty ever had. A soft knock on the door made her turn. Lila stood in the doorway, holding a cup of water. "Papa said to bring you this," the girl said shyly. Mara took the cup. "Thank you." Lila lingered, glancing at Owen. "Is he your son?" "Yes." "He's little." "He's 7. I'm 6, Lila said proudly. "Almost 6.5. She paused. "Does he like chickens?" Mara blinked at the unexpected question. "I don't know. He's never been around them much." "I have 12 chickens, Lila said, "and 1 rooster, but he's mean, so Papa says I should stay away from him. I could show Owen the chickens, if he wants." There was such earnest hope in the girl's voice that Mara felt something crack inside her chest. "I think he'd like that," she said quietly. Lila beamed and ran off, leaving Mara alone with the cup of water and a feeling she couldn't quite name. She looked down at Owen, still sleeping, and wondered what she'd gotten them into. By the time the sun set, Mara had made a decision. She waited until Owen woke, helped him drink some water, then dressed him in the cleanest clothes they had, which wasn't saying much. Together they walked out into the main room of the house, where Tarek was setting the table for supper. He looked up when they entered. "Feeling better?" "Yes. Thank you." Mara straightened her shoulders. "I want to work." Tarek set down the plate he was holding. "You just woke up." "I'm fine, and I won't take charity. If we're staying here, even just for a few days, I need to earn our keep." "You don't need to earn anything." "Yes," Mara said firmly. "I do." Tarek studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded. "All right. You can help with the house, cooking, cleaning, whatever needs doing, but not tonight. Tonight you rest." "I can—" "Tonight," Tarek repeated, his voice quiet but immovable. "You rest." Mara wanted to argue, but the truth was she could barely stand without swaying, so she nodded and let him guide her to the table. Supper was simple, beans and cornbread with a bit of bacon, but it was the best thing Mara had tasted in months. Owen ate without speaking, his eyes darting between Tarek and Lila like he was trying to figure out if they were real. Lila chattered enough for all of them, telling Owen about the chickens and the creek and the time she'd found a lizard in the barn. Tarek ate in silence, but Mara caught him watching the children, his expression softening in a way that made him look younger, less hard. After supper, Lila took Owen outside to see the stars, and Mara started to clear the table. Tarek stopped her with a hand on her wrist, gentle, but firm enough to make her freeze. "I said rest," he said. "I'm just clearing dishes." "And I'm telling you to sit down." Mara pulled her wrist free, her heart pounding harder than it should. She wasn't used to being told what to do, not anymore, not after she'd finally escaped Silas. But Tarek's voice held no cruelty, only a strange kind of concern that she didn't know how to respond to. "I don't need to be taken care of," she said, hating the way her voice shook. "Didn't say you did. But you're in my house, and I'm asking you to rest. That's so hard to do?" Mara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something unexpected in his eyes, loneliness. The same bone-deep exhaustion she felt every time she looked in a mirror. This man knew what it was like to carry too much weight for too long. And maybe, just maybe, he was asking her to set it down for one night. Not because she was weak, but because she didn't have to be strong every single second. She sat down. Tarek nodded and started washing the dishes himself, his movements efficient and practiced. Mara watched him work and felt the knot in her chest loosen, just a little. Outside, Lila's laughter rang out, followed by Owen's softer, more hesitant giggle. Mara closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it would be like if this was real. If this quiet house and this quiet man and this chance at safety were something she could keep. Then she opened her eyes and reminded herself that nothing good ever lasted. Not for people like her. The next morning, Mara woke before dawn. Old habits. She dressed quickly, checked on Owen, still asleep, his breathing deep and even, and slipped out of the room. The house was silent, the air cool and still. She found the kitchen and started a fire in the stove, moving quietly so she wouldn't wake anyone. She had just set the coffee on to boil when Tarek appeared in the doorway. "You're up early," he said. Mara turned, startled. "I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I'm always up at this hour." He moved to the counter and pulled out a skillet. "I'll make breakfast." "I can do it." "So can I." They stared at each other for a moment, and Mara saw the flicker of amusement in his eyes before he turned away. She almost smiled despite herself. They worked side by side in silence, Tarek frying eggs while Mara sliced bread. It was strange, this easy rhythm they fell into, like they'd done this 100 times before. Mara kept waiting for him to say something, ask where she'd come from, why she was alone, what she was running from. But he didn't. He just cooked, and when the food was ready, he set it on the table without ceremony. Lila came running in a few minutes later, followed by a sleepy-eyed Owen. The children ate with the enthusiasm of those who'd forgotten what hunger felt like, and Mara watched them with a feeling she couldn't name. After breakfast, Tarek pushed back from the table. "I've got work to do in the south pasture. I'll be gone most of the day." "What do you need done here?" Mara asked. He hesitated, then said, "The house could use a good cleaning, but only if you're feeling up to it." "I'm fine." Tarek nodded and stood. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, and looked back at her. "If you need anything, Lila knows where to find me." Then he was gone, and Mara was left alone with the children and a house that hadn't been properly cleaned in what looked like years. She set to work. It felt good, having something to do with her hands. She swept the floors, scrubbed the counters, washed the windows until they gleamed. Lila and Owen played outside, their voices drifting in through the open door, and Mara let herself fall into the rhythm of it. The simple, honest work. The feeling of making something better. By the time Tarek came back, the sun was low, and the house smelled like lemon oil and soap. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes moving over the clean floors and polished surfaces, and something shifted in his expression. "You didn't have to do all this," he said. "I wanted to." He nodded slowly, then looked at her. "Thank you." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was anything but. Mara felt her throat tighten and turned away before he could see her face. "It's nothing," she said. But they both knew it wasn't. The days blurred together after that. Mara fell into a routine, cooking, cleaning, mending clothes, all the small tasks that made a house a home. Owen grew stronger, his cheeks filling out, his laughter coming more easily. He and Lila became inseparable, trailing after each other like shadows, inventing games and adventures that only children could dream up. And Tarek? Tarek was a constant presence, solid and quiet, always working but never far. Mara found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way he moved, economical and sure. The way he spoke to Lila, patient even when she tested his limits. The way he treated Owen, never with pity but with a kind of careful respect that made the boy's eyes shine. She told herself it didn't mean anything, that this was temporary, that as soon as she had enough strength, enough supplies, she and Owen would move on. But the lie grew thinner every day. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after they'd arrived, Mara was washing dishes when Tarek came in from the barn. He moved to the counter beside her and started drying the plates without a word. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes before he spoke. "You planning to stay?" Mara's hand stilled in the water. "I don't know." "That's an honest answer, at least." She glanced at him. His face was turned away, focused on the plate in his hands, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "You want us to leave?" she asked quietly. "No." The answer came fast, almost too fast. Tarek set down the plate and looked at her. No, I don't want you to leave, but I need to know if you're planning to, for Lila's sake. Mara understood. Lila had already attached herself to Owen, and losing him would hurt. She dried her hands on her apron and turned to face Tarek fully. I don't have anywhere else to go, she admitted. The words tasted like failure, but they were true. If I leave here, we'll just end up right back where we started. Or worse. Then stay. It's not that simple. Why not? Because nothing good lasts. Because I don't deserve this. Because the moment I let myself believe this is real, it'll all fall apart. But she didn't say any of that. Instead, she said, I can't take advantage of your kindness forever. Tarek's expression hardened. You think that's what this is? Kindness? What else would it be? He stared at her for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that Mara couldn't read. Then he turned away. I lost my wife 3 years ago, he said quietly. Fever took her in 4 days. 1 minute she was fine, the next she was gone, and I didn't... He stopped, his jaw clenching. This house has been empty ever since. Just me and Lila, rattling around in it like ghosts. Then you showed up, half dead in my yard, and suddenly there's life here again. Laughter, warmth. I'm not doing you a favor, Mara. You're doing me one. Mara's breath caught. She wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come, so she just stood there, staring at his broad back, and felt something inside her shift, something she'd thought was dead a long time ago. Stay, Tarek said again, softer this time. Please. And Mara, who'd spent years running, who'd sworn she'd never depend on anyone again, heard herself say, All right, we'll stay. The word hung in the air between them like something fragile and new. Tarek turned back to face her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The kitchen was warm, the lamplight soft, and outside the desert night pressed against the windows with its familiar weight. Mara saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe, or fear, or both, before he nodded once and went back to drying dishes. They finished in silence, but it wasn't the heavy kind anymore. It was the silence of two people who'd crossed some invisible line and were still figuring out what that meant. That night, Mara lay awake long after Owen had fallen asleep beside her. She stared at the ceiling and thought about the word she'd spoken. Stay. Such a small word for such a big decision. She'd spent 3 years running from Silas, dragging Owen from town to town, never stopping long enough to catch her breath. And now she'd agreed to stop. To stay. To let herself believe, even for a little while, that this broken-down ranch in the middle of nowhere could be something close to home. It terrified her more than running ever had. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, her dreams were quiet for the first time in months. The next morning brought change in the way that desert mornings sometimes did. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Mara woke to find Tarek already up, standing in the yard with a shovel in his hands and a determined set to his shoulders. What are you doing? She asked from the doorway. Garden, he said, without looking up. You mentioned wanting to grow vegetables. Ground's hard, but it'll take if we work it right. Mara stepped off the porch, barefoot in the cool dirt. You don't have to... I know I don't have to. He drove the shovel into the earth with more force than necessary. I want to. She watched him work for a moment, this quiet man who spoke in actions instead of words, and felt something warm unfurl in her chest. She went back inside, pulled on her boots, and returned with a rake. Show me where, she said. Tarek looked at her, surprise flickering across his face before he nodded toward a patch of ground near the house. Here, gets morning sun, some afternoon shade. Should be good for tomatoes, beans, and maybe squash if we're lucky. They worked side by side as the sun climbed higher, breaking up the hard-packed earth, clearing rocks and roots. It was brutal work, the kind that left blisters and made muscles scream, but Mara threw herself into it with a fierceness that surprised even her. Every shovelful of dirt felt like she was digging something out of herself, some old poison that had been sitting there too long. Lila and Owen appeared after breakfast, and Tarek put them to work hauling rocks to the edge of the property. The children turned it into a game, racing each other back and forth, their laughter cutting through the morning heat. Mara straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead, and watched Owen sprint past with a rock clutched in both hands, his face bright with effort and joy. He's good for her, Tarek said quietly. Mara turned. Tarek was watching Lila chase after Owen, his expression soft in a way she'd rarely seen. She's been lonely, he continued. I tried to be enough, but a father's not the same as a friend. She has you. That's more than most children get. Maybe? Tarek jabbed his shovel into the ground and leaned on it. But I can't give her everything, can't be her whole world, no matter how much I want to. Mara understood that feeling too well. She'd tried to be everything for Owen after they'd left Silas, mother, father, protector, provider. But she'd seen the way her son had started to fold in on himself, growing quieter and more withdrawn with each passing month. And now, watching him laugh and play and act like the child he was supposed to be, she realized how much he'd needed this. Needed more than just her. They're good together, she said softly. Yeah, they are. Tarek went back to digging, and Mara did the same. By midday, they had a patch of turned earth about 10 feet square, raw and dark against the pale desert soil. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That afternoon, while the children napped in the shade and Tarek rode out to check the fence line, Mara found herself alone in the kitchen. She stood at the window looking out at the garden plot and let herself imagine what it might look like in a few months. Green vines climbing, tomatoes ripening, Owen kneeling in the dirt to pull carrots. A future that felt almost real. She was still standing there when Tarek came back, dusty and tired. He washed up at the pump, then came inside and poured himself a cup of water from the pitcher on the table. You all right? He asked. Mara realized she was crying, not sobbing, just quiet tears tracking down her face. She wiped them away quickly. I'm fine. Doesn't look fine. It's nothing, just... She stopped, searching for words. I haven't had this in a long time. A place, people, something to look forward to. Tarek set down his cup and crossed the room. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes, but far enough to give her space. You have it now, he said. For how long? As long as you want it. Mara wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. What if I mess it up? She whispered. What if I can't be what you need, what Lila needs? You already are. Tarek's voice was steady, certain. You think I don't see what you've done here? This house was dying before you came. Now it's alive again. That's not nothing, Mara. That's everything. She looked up at him, this man who'd taken her in when she had nothing, and felt the last of her walls start to crumble. She wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. Fear of ruining this fragile thing they were building. Fear of wanting too much. So instead she just nodded and turned back to the window, and Tarek let her. But she felt him standing there behind her, solid and patient, and it was enough. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost like normal. Mara cooked and cleaned and tended the fledgling garden, coaxing life from stubborn soil. Tarek worked the ranch from dawn to dusk, fixing what was broken, maintaining what still held. The children grew browner and louder, their friendship deepening into something that looked like siblinghood, and slowly, carefully, Mara and Tarek began to orbit each other in a way that felt inevitable. It was in the small things, the way Tarek started leaving his coffee cup on the counter for her to wash, because he knew she liked the routine, the way Mara learned to make his coffee exactly how he liked it, strong and black, hot enough to burn, the way their hands would brush when passing dishes at supper, and neither would pull away quite as fast as they should. 2 weeks after they'd turned the garden plot, Mara was hanging laundry when she heard Owen scream. The sound cut through the afternoon heat like a knife. She dropped the shirt she was holding and ran, her heart in her throat. She found him near the barn, Lila kneeling beside him, her face white with panic. What happened? Mara demanded, dropping to her knees. He fell, Lila said, her voice shaking. We were climbing the fence and he slipped. Owen was clutching his arm, his face twisted in pain. Mara gently moved his hand and saw the bone jutting against the skin at an unnatural angle. Not broken through, thank heaven, but broken nonetheless. Get your father, she told Lila. Now. The girl took off running. Mara gathered Owen into her lap, murmuring reassurances she didn't feel. His skin was hot, his breathing too fast. Shock, her mind whispered. She'd seen it before. Tarek appeared within minutes, Lila at his heels. He took one look at Owen's arm and his jaw tightened. I need to set it, he said. You know how? Did it for myself once, and for a ranch hand years back. He met her eyes. It's going to hurt. Mara nodded. Do it. Tarek sent Lila inside for whiskey and clean cloth, then knelt beside Owen. Hey there, son, he said quietly. I need you to be brave for me. Can you do that? Owen nodded, tears streaming down his face. Good. I'm going to fix your arm. It's going to hurt worse before it gets better, but then it'll heal, you understand? Yes, sir, Owen whispered. Tarek looked at Mara. Hold him steady. She wrapped her arms around her son, pinning him against her chest. Tarek took Owen's arm in both hands, his movements gentle but sure. He felt along the bone, his expression focused, then looked at Mara. On 3, he said. He didn't count, just pulled, and Owen's scream tore through the air like something living. Mara held him tighter, her own eyes burning, and felt the moment the bone slipped back into place. Tarek worked quickly after that, splinting the arm with straight branches and wrapping it tight. By the time he finished, Owen had gone limp against Mara's chest, unconscious from pain or shock or both. Get him inside, Tarek said. Keep him cool. I'll ride to town for laudanum. Town's 3 hours away. I'll make it in 2. He was already standing, already moving toward the barn. Lila, stay with Mara. Don't leave her side. He was gone before Mara could argue. She carried Owen inside and laid him on the bed, Lila hovering anxiously nearby. The girl's face was streaked with tears, and Mara pulled her close. It's not your fault, she said firmly. But we were climbing. Children climb. That's what they do. This was an accident. Lila buried her face in Mara's shoulder and sobbed. Mara held her with one arm while keeping her other hand on Owen's forehead, monitoring his fever. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Owen woke once, whimpering in pain, and Mara gave him water and whispered stories until he drifted off again. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the yard, the sun was setting and her nerves were scraped raw. Tarek came through the door like a storm, laudanum bottle in hand. He didn't waste time with questions, just measured out a dose and helped Mara get it down Owen's throat. The change was almost immediate. The lines of pain eased from Owen's face and his breathing deepened into real sleep. Tarek sagged back against the wall, his shirt dark with sweat. How long was he conscious? Off and on, the fever's holding steady. That's good, means no infection yet. He scrubbed a hand over his face. We'll need to watch him close for the next few days. I will. We will, Tarek corrected. He looked at her, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. You're not doing this alone. Mara felt something break open inside her chest, something she'd been holding closed for so long she'd forgotten it was there. She opened her mouth to argue, to insist she could handle it, but the words died on her lips. Because the truth was, she didn't want to handle it alone. Not anymore. All right, she whispered. That night they took turns sitting with Owen. Mara insisted Tarek sleep first. He'd ridden hard and looked ready to collapse, but he only made it 2 hours before he was back, too restless to stay away. They sat on opposite sides of the bed, watching Owen breathe, and somewhere around midnight Mara's eyes started to close despite herself. Sleep, Tarek said softly. I've got him. I can't. Yes, you can. I'll wake you if anything changes. Mara wanted to resist, but exhaustion pulled at her like a current. She leaned back against the wall and let her eyes drift shut, and the last thing she remembered was the sound of Tarek's voice, low and steady, singing some half-remembered lullaby to her sleeping son. She woke to gray dawn light and the smell of coffee. Tarek was still in the chair, his eyes red-rimmed but alert, and Owen was sleeping peacefully. Any change? Mara asked, her voice rough. Fever broke an hour ago. He woke once, drank some water, went back to sleep. Relief hit her so hard she had to close her eyes against it. When she opened them again, Tarek was watching her. You should rest, she said. So should you. I slept. 2 hours doesn't count. He stood, stretching muscles that had gone stiff from sitting. Come on, I'll make breakfast and you're going to eat it. Then we're both going to sleep while Lila watches him. She's too young. She's old enough to come get us if he wakes, and she needs to feel useful right now. Tarek's expression softened. She's been blaming herself. Let her help. Mara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right, so she let him pull her to her feet and guide her to the kitchen, where Lila was already up, her small face serious with responsibility. They ate in silence, eggs and bread that Mara barely tasted, and then Tarek sent Lila to sit with Owen while he walked Mara to her room. "Sleep," he said. "I'll be right next door if you need me." Mara nodded and sank onto the bed, too tired to even remove her boots. She heard Tarek's footsteps fade down the hall, heard the creak of his bedroom door, and then there was only silence and the soft desert wind outside her window. She slept hard and dreamless, and when she woke, it was afternoon. For a moment she panicked, but then she heard voices in the other room, Owen's laugh, high and clear, and Tarek's deeper rumble in response. She got up and found them in the kitchen, Owen sitting at the table with his splinted arm propped on a pillow, while Tarek showed him how to shuffle cards one-handed. "Mama!" Owen's face lit up when he saw her. "Mr. Tarek's teaching me poker." "Is he now?" Mara looked at Tarek, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "Just the basics," he said. Figured he needed something to do besides stare at the ceiling. Mara crossed to Owen and pressed her hand to his forehead. "Cool. No fever." She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "How do you feel?" "My arm hurts," Owen admitted, "but not as bad as before. And Mr. Tarek says I get laudanum every 4 hours, so that helps." "He's been brave," Tarek said quietly. "Braver than most men I've known." Owen's chest puffed up with pride, and Mara felt her throat tighten. She looked at Tarek and saw the same fierce protectiveness in his eyes that she felt for her son. This man who owed them nothing had ridden 3 hours to get medicine for a child who wasn't his, had stayed up all night to make sure that child kept breathing, had given them not just shelter, but care. Family. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate but true. Tarek just nodded and went back to the cards. Owen healed slowly but steadily. The fever stayed gone, and the bone began to knit. Tarek checked it every few days, his hands gentle despite their size, and each time he pronounced it healing well. Mara watched the two of them together, her son and this quiet rancher, and saw something growing there that looked like trust. Owen started calling him Sir less and using his name more, started seeking him out with questions about the ranch, the animals, the way things worked. And Tarek answered every question with patience, treating the boy's curiosity like it mattered. Lila, for her part, appointed herself Owen's nurse. She brought him books to read, played quiet games that wouldn't jar his arm, and reported to Mara hourly on his condition with the seriousness of a field surgeon. The guilt had faded from her eyes, replaced by a fierce determination to make sure her friend got better. Watching them together, all of them, this accidental family, Mara felt something shift inside her. The fear was still there, the certainty that this couldn't last. But underneath it, fragile as new growth, was something else. Hope. 3 weeks after the accident, Owen's arm was strong enough that Tarek removed the splint. They all gathered in the kitchen for the unveiling, even Lila, who'd insisted on being present despite her squeamishness. Tarek unwrapped the cloth carefully, and when the last layer came away, they all held their breath. The arm was thinner than the other, the skin pale from being covered, but it was straight, whole. "Wiggle your fingers," Tarek instructed. Owen did. They all moved. "Now make a fist." Owen's hand curled slowly into a ball. It trembled with effort, but it closed. Lila cheered. Mara felt tears prick her eyes. And Tarek just smiled, small and satisfied, and ruffled Owen's hair. "You did good, son," he said. That night, after the children were asleep, Mara found Tarek on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, looking out at the desert, and she sat down beside him without asking. "He called you sir today," she said, "when you took off the splint. I thought he'd stopped that." "Formal occasion," Tarek said. "Deserved formality. Still, he doesn't do that with just anyone anymore." "Good. Means he's learning who to respect and who to fear. They're not the same thing." Mara looked at him. "You're good with him, with both of them." "I just treat them like people. Seems to work." "It's more than that." She hesitated, then said, "You'd have made a good father." "To more than one, I mean." Tarek was quiet for a long moment. "My wife and I wanted more children," he said finally, "but it never happened, and then she was gone, and it was just me and Lila. I thought that was it, that we'd just be the two of us forever. And now?" He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his eyes were dark and unreadable. Now I don't know what to think. Feels like I've got a family again, even though I never asked for it. Even though I'm scared as hell I'm going to do something wrong and lose it. You won't, Mara said fiercely. You're a good man, Tarek. Better than any I've known. You don't know what you're saying. Yes, I do. She held his gaze. I know exactly what I'm saying. The air between them went tight and charged, like the moment before a storm broke. Tarek's hand moved, hesitant, and settled over hers on the step. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. Mara, he said, her name rough in his throat. But before she could answer, before she could figure out what she wanted to say, a sound split the night, hoofbeats coming fast. They both stood, Tarek's hand going to the knife at his belt. The rider came into view a moment later, just a dark shape against the stars, and pulled up hard in the yard. A man dismounted, stumbling slightly, and Mara's blood turned to ice. She knew that stumble, knew the shape of those shoulders, the way he held himself like the world owed him something. Mara, the man shouted. I know you're in there. Beside her, Tarek had gone very still. Who is that? Mara's voice came out flat, dead. My husband. And Silas Creed stepped into the lamplight, his eyes finding hers across the yard, and smiled. The smile on Silas Creed's face was the same one Mara remembered from the worst nights of her marriage, all teeth and no warmth, the kind of smile that promised pain. There she is, he said, his voice carrying across the yard like he was greeting an old friend. My runaway wife. Mara felt Tarek shift beside her, his body angling between her and Silas in a way that was pure instinct. She put a hand on his arm, her fingers digging in harder than she meant to. Don't, she whispered. He's dangerous. So am I, Tarek said quietly, but he didn't move forward. Silas took a few steps closer, leading his horse behind him. In the lamplight spilling from the house, Mara could see he looked worse than when she'd left him. Thinner, meaner, with hollows under his eyes that spoke of too much whiskey and not enough sleep. But his hands were steady, and she could see the gun belt slung low on his hips. You've led me on quite a chase, Mara, Silas said conversationally. 3 years. 3 goddamn years tracking you across half the territory. His eyes slid to Tarek, assessing. And here I find you playing house with some rancher. Didn't take you long to forget your vows, did it? I didn't forget anything, Mara said, forcing her voice steady. Especially not why I left. You left because you're weak, always were. Silas tied his horse to the porch rail like he owned the place. But that's all right. I'm here to take you home now, you and the boy. No. The word came from Tarek, flat and final. Silas's eyes narrowed. This your land? He asked. It is. Then you've got no right to keep another man's wife from him. That's the law. The law also says a man can't beat his wife half to death and expect her to stay. Tarek's voice was calm, but Mara could feel the violence coiled beneath it. She's not going anywhere. Silas laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. She tell you that story? That I beat her? He shook his head, still smiling. Mara's always been one for tall tales. Truth is, she ran off because she couldn't handle being a proper wife. Couldn't handle discipline when she needed it. Discipline, Mara repeated, her voice shaking with rage now instead of fear. Is that what you call breaking my ribs? Locking me in the cellar for 2 days because I burned your supper? You needed to learn. I learned. She stepped forward, out from behind Tarek's protective stance. I learned that you're a coward who only feels big when he's hurting someone smaller. I learned that I'd rather die in the desert than spend one more night under your roof. And I learned that Owen deserves better than a father who sees him as property instead of a person. Silas's smile faded. Careful, Mara. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Good. It should be hard. The boy's mine, by law and by blood. You can't keep him from me. Watch me. Silas's hand drifted toward his gun, and Mara felt her heart stop. But before he could draw, Tarek moved, not fast, not aggressive, just shifted his weight so his own hand rested on the knife at his belt. The message was clear. You pull that gun, Tarek said quietly, and one of us isn't walking away from this. Maybe both of us. You willing to bet on those odds? Silas hesitated, his eyes darting between Tarek and Mara. She could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, his hand dropped. "This isn't over," he said. "That boy's my son. I got rights." "Rights you gave up when you put your hands on his mother," Tarek replied. "You want to take this to a judge, go ahead. But until then, you're not welcome on my land." "Your land?" Silas spat in the dirt. "You think because you got a piece of paper and some fence posts that makes you somebody? I know your kind. Playing the hero for a woman who'll spread her legs for any man who shows her a little kindness." Tarek moved so fast Mara barely saw it. 1 second he was standing still, the next he had Silas by the throat, slammed against the porch rail hard enough to make the wood creak. His knife was out, the blade pressed just under Silas's jaw. "You say another word about her," Tarek said, his voice gone deadly soft, "and I'll cut your tongue out. We clear?" Silas's eyes bulged, his hands clawing at Tarek's wrist. But Tarek didn't budge, just held him there like he weighed nothing. "I said, are we clear?" "Yes," Silas choked out. Tarek held him a moment longer, then released him with a shove that sent Silas stumbling backward. The smaller man caught himself on his horse, coughing and rubbing his throat. "Get off my property," Tarek said, "and don't come back." Silas pulled himself onto his horse, his face twisted with fury. But beneath the anger, Mara saw something else: fear. He was afraid of Tarek, and that knowledge gave her a savage satisfaction. "This isn't finished," Silas said, his voice ragged. "I'll be back, with the sheriff if I have to, and when I come I'm taking what's mine." He wheeled his horse around and kicked it into a gallop, disappearing into the darkness the same way he'd come. The sound of hoofbeats faded slowly, swallowed by the desert night. Mara stood frozen, her whole body shaking. She heard Tarek slide his knife back into its sheath, felt him turn toward her, but she couldn't move, couldn't think. All she could see was Silas's face, that terrible smile, the promise in his eyes that this was far from over. "Mara." Tarek's voice was gentle now, all the violence gone from it. "Look at me." She forced herself to meet his eyes. They were dark with concern and something else she couldn't name. "He's gone," Tarek said. "He can't hurt you here." "You don't know him." "He meant what he said. He'll come back and he'll—" Her voice broke. "He'll take Owen. He has the right. By law, he has the right. The law is not absolute, not out here. It's enough. He's Owen's father. No judge is going to rule against that." "Then we don't let it get to a judge." Tarek stepped closer, and Mara saw the determination in his face. "We fight him, however we have to." "You can't. This isn't your fight. The hell it isn't." His hands came up to frame her face, and Mara felt the warmth of his palms against her skin. "You're here. Owen's here. That makes it my fight. You understand?" Mara wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't know what he was getting into, but the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, she was tired of fighting alone, tired of running, of looking over her shoulder, of being afraid every single day that Silas would find them and take away the one good thing she had left. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know. Me too." Tarek's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and Mara realized she was crying. "But we're not doing this alone. Not anymore." She closed her eyes and let herself lean into him, just for a moment. Let herself feel the solid warmth of another person, the steady beat of his heart under her ear. It had been so long since she'd let anyone hold her that she'd forgotten what it felt like. What safety felt like. A sound from inside the house made them both freeze. They pulled apart to find Lila standing in the doorway, her face pale in the lamplight. "Papa?" Her voice was small, frightened. "Who was that man?" Tarek crossed to her and knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "Just someone passing through. He's gone now." "I heard yelling." "I know. I'm sorry we woke you." "Is Mara leaving?" Lila's eyes were huge, wet with unshed tears. "Is Owen leaving?" "No, baby. They're staying right here." "But that man said—" "I don't care what he said." Tarek pulled her into his arms, and Lila buried her face in his shoulder. "They're not going anywhere, I promise." Mara watched them, her heart breaking and mending at the same time. This man who'd already lost so much was ready to fight for them, to risk everything for a woman and child who weren't even his. She didn't deserve that kind of loyalty, didn't know what to do with it, but she was starting to think she wanted to learn. Tarek carried Lila back to bed, and Mara checked on Owen. The boy was still asleep, his splinted arm resting on the pillow, his face peaceful. He hadn't heard Silas. Hadn't seen his father standing in the yard, claiming ownership like Owen was a horse or a piece of land. Mara brushed the hair back from his forehead and felt rage rise up in her so fierce it stole her breath. Silas could call it rights all he wanted, could cite law and blood and fatherhood, but Owen was hers. She'd protected him, fed him, loved him when Silas had done nothing but terrorize them both. And she'd be damned if she let that man take him away now. She was still sitting there when Tarek came back. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the hall lamp. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see him." "Then don't close your eyes yet." He moved into the room and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. "I'll stay, just in case." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to." So Mara stayed in the chair beside Owen's bed, and Tarek stayed on the floor, and they kept watch together through the long, dark hours. Neither of them spoke, but Mara drew strength from his presence, from knowing she wasn't alone. Dawn came gray and cool, and with it came a strange kind of clarity. Mara stood and moved to where Tarek sat. He looked up at her, his eyes tired but alert. "He meant it," she said quietly. "About going to the sheriff. About taking Owen. I know. You could lose everything, your ranch, your reputation. They might even arrest you for keeping us here." "Let them try." "Tarek, no." He stood, and suddenly they were close enough that Mara could feel the heat coming off him. No more running, no more hiding. If Silas wants a fight, he'll get one, but I'm not letting him take either of you. "Why?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Why are you doing this? We're nothing to you. Just strangers who showed up half dead in your yard. You stopped being strangers the day you stayed." Tarek's hand came up, hesitant, and traced the line of her jaw. "You stopped being strangers when Owen started calling me by my name, when Lila started smiling again. When I woke up one morning and realized this house felt like a home for the first time in 3 years. That's not enough reason to risk everything." "It's the only reason that matters." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "I lost my wife. Lost the future we were supposed to have together. I thought that was it, that I'd just go through the motions until Lila was grown and then maybe I'd figure out what the hell to do with the rest of my life. But then you came. And suddenly I've got a reason to wake up that isn't just duty. I've got something to fight for again, someone to fight for." Mara felt something break open inside her chest, something that had been locked away for so long she'd forgotten it existed. "I'm broken," she whispered. "Silas broke me. I don't know if I can be what you need." "You already are." Tarek's other hand came up to cup her face, and Mara found herself caught in his gaze. "You're strong, Mara, stronger than you think, and I don't need you to be anything except yourself." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it hurt. "What if this goes wrong?" she asked. "What if Silas wins? What if—" "Then we'll deal with it, together." He leaned closer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely. Not yet. But trust me enough to let me help. Can you do that?" Mara closed her eyes and felt tears slip down her cheeks. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, I can do that." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other up. And when Mara finally stepped back, something had shifted between them, something fundamental and irreversible. The next few days were tense. Mara jumped at every sound, expecting Silas to come riding back with the sheriff in tow. Tarek took to wearing his gun even around the house, and he taught Mara how to shoot. Not well, but well enough that she could defend herself if she had to. Owen noticed the change in atmosphere, the way the adults kept looking toward the road. He grew quieter, more watchful, and Mara hated seeing that wariness creep back into his eyes. "Is my father coming back?" he asked one evening while they were washing dishes. Mara's hand stilled in the water. She'd hoped to avoid this conversation a little longer, but Owen was too smart to be fooled. "Maybe," she said carefully. "Would that bother you?" Owen was quiet for a long time. "I don't want to go with him," he said finally, his voice very small. "I like it here. I like Lila and Mr. Tarek. I like you being happy." Mara's throat closed up. She set down the dish she was holding and pulled Owen into her arms, heedless of the soapy water dripping everywhere. "You're not going anywhere," she said fiercely. "I won't let him take you. I swear it." "He's bigger than you." "Mr. Tarek's bigger than him." Owen pulled back, looking up at her with those serious eyes that made him seem far older than 7. "Mr. Tarek would fight him? For us?" "Yes." "Why?" It was the same question Mara had asked, and she found herself giving Owen the same answer Tarek had given her. "Because he cares about us. Because we're family now." "But we're not really—" "Family's not just blood, Owen. It's who shows up, who stays, who fights for you when things get hard." She smoothed his hair back. "Mr. Tarek showed up, so did Lila. They're family, and family protects each other." Owen nodded slowly, processing this. Then he said, "I'm glad we found them." "Me too, baby. Me too." That night, after the children were asleep, Mara found Tarek in the barn. He was checking the horses, making sure everything was secure, but she knew he was really just restless, worried. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before he smiled slightly. "Could say the same to you." "I keep thinking about what Silas said, about going to the sheriff. He won't get far with that. Sheriff Dawson's a fair man. He'll want to hear both sides. And when he does? When Silas tells him I ran off with his son? What then?" Tarek set down the brush he'd been using and turned to face her fully. "Then I tell him the truth. That you came here running from a man who hurt you. That Owen's safer here than he ever was with his father. Your word against his. Not just mine." Tarek moved closer. "There's something I haven't told you. About a week after you got here, I rode into town for supplies. While I was there, I talked to the doctor, asked him some questions about injuries, broken bones, bruises, that kind of thing. He told me things. About patterns. About how to tell the difference between an accident and deliberate harm." Mara felt her pulse quicken. "Why would you do that?" "Because I saw the scars, Mara. The ones on your wrists from being tied up. The way you flinch sometimes when someone moves too fast. I'm not blind." His voice was gentle but firm. "I wanted to know what I was looking at. And more than that, I wanted to know how to prove it if I had to." "You can't prove old injuries." "Maybe not. But Owen's arm, that was recent. And I said it, which means I can testify about the break, about how it happened, about the fever that came after and how we treated it." He paused. "It's not much, but it's something. And combined with your testimony about what Silas did to you, it might be enough to make a judge think twice about giving him custody." Mara stared at him, stunned. "You've been planning this whole time." "I've been preparing for it. There's a difference." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you had enough to worry about. And because I wasn't sure if it would come to this. I hoped maybe Silas would just give up, move on. But now—" He shook his head. "Now I know better. He's not going to stop. So we need to be ready." Mara felt something hot and fierce rise up in her chest. This man who barely knew her had been thinking 3 steps ahead, building a case, preparing to defend her in ways she hadn't even considered. It was more than kindness, more than charity. It was partnership. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice rough. "Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything." "No, but you're fighting, and that—" She stopped, searching for words. "That means everything." Tarek reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, solid. "We're in this together now. All the way through." Mara squeezed his fingers. "All the way through." They stood there in the quiet barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and Mara felt something settle inside her. Fear was still there, sharp and cold, but alongside it was determination, hope, and the knowledge that whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. 2 days later, Silas made good on his threat. Mara heard the horses first, multiple riders coming fast. She was in the garden, checking the small green shoots that had finally started to push through the soil when the sound reached her. Her blood went cold. "Tarek!" she called, already running for the house. He met her at the door, Lila and Owen behind him. "Inside," he said. "All of you, now." "Papa, what's happening?" Lila's voice was high with fear. "Just do what I say." Mara grabbed both children and pulled them into the house. Through the window, she watched 3 riders approach. Silas in the lead, flanked by two men she didn't recognize. One wore a sheriff's star. Tarek stepped off the porch to meet them, his hand resting casually on his gun. Mara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. The sheriff was a big man, gray-haired and weathered. He looked tired, like this was the last thing he wanted to be doing. "Tarek Sable?" he called. "That's me. I'm Sheriff Dawson. This man here says you're harboring his wife and son against their will." "He's lying." Tarek's voice was calm, matter-of-fact. "She came here of her own accord, running from him. I offered her shelter. That's all." Silas urged his horse forward. "She's my wife, the boy's my son. They belong with me." "They're not property," Tarek said sharply. "And they don't belong to anyone." "The law says different." Silas looked at the sheriff. "I got rights. You know I do." Sheriff Dawson sighed and dismounted. "Mr. Sable, I need to speak with Mrs. Creed. Is she here?" Mara made the decision in a heartbeat. She stepped out onto the porch before Tarek could stop her, her chin high despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm here," she said. Silas's eyes locked onto her, triumphant and cruel. "There you are, wife. I'm not your wife anymore. Not where it counts. You took vows. You broke them first." Mara descended the steps, forcing herself to walk steady. "Every time you hit me, every time you locked me up, every time you hurt our son." "Lies," Silas spat. "Nothing but lies to turn people against me." Sheriff Dawson held up a hand. "Everybody just calm down." He looked at Mara. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions. Are you here against your will?" "No." "Has Mr. Sable or anyone on this property threatened you or your son?" "No, they've done nothing but help us." The sheriff nodded slowly. "And what about your husband's claim that you ran off with his son?" "I left," Mara said clearly, "because if I'd stayed one more day, Silas would have killed me. Or Owen, or both of us. I left to save our lives." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth." Mara pulled up her sleeves, revealing the old scars on her wrists. "He tied me up and left me in the cellar for 2 days because I burned his supper. He broke 3 of my ribs because I talked back. And he would have done worse if I hadn't run." "She's making it up," Silas protested, but there was something in his voice now, panic, barely concealed. Sheriff Dawson studied the scars, his expression darkening. Then he looked at Tarek. "You can verify any of this?" "I can verify that when she showed up here, she was half-starved and terrified. I can verify that her son had injuries consistent with neglect. And I can verify that when Silas Creed showed up on my property 3 nights ago, he threatened her and tried to take the boy by force." "He's lying to protect her." "I've known Tarek Sable for 10 years, the sheriff cut in. "He's a lot of things, but a liar isn't one of them." He turned back to Mara. "Ma'am, do you want to go back with your husband?" "No." "And the boy? Does he want to go?" "Ask him yourself." Mara turned and called Owen out. He came slowly, Lila's hand clutched in his, and stood beside his mother. The sheriff crouched down to the boy's level. "Son, do you know who that man is?" He nodded toward Silas. Owen nodded, his face pale. "Do you want to go with him?" Owen looked at Silas, then at his mother, then at Tarek. And in a voice that was small but steady, he said, "No, sir. I want to stay here with Mama and Mr. Tarek and Lila." Silas exploded. "He's a child. He doesn't know what he wants." "He knows enough," the sheriff said, standing. "And unless you can prove otherwise, I'm inclined to let the boy stay where he is." "She's my wife." "A wife who's saying you beat her. That's grounds for separation in any court." Sheriff Dawson's voice had gone hard. "Now, I'm not a judge. I can't dissolve your marriage or grant custody. But I can tell you that if you try to take that woman or that boy off this property against their will, I'll arrest you for assault." Silas's face went purple with rage. "You can't do that." "I just did." The sheriff mounted his horse. "You want to fight this? You do it legal. File papers, get a court date. But until then, you leave these people alone. We clear?" For a moment, Mara thought Silas would refuse. Thought he'd draw his gun, start shooting, do something desperate and stupid. But the third rider, silent until now, leaned over and muttered something in Silas's ear, something that made Silas's jaw clench and his hands shake. "Fine," he bit out. "I'll do it legal. But this isn't over, Mara. Not by a long shot. He wheeled his horse around and galloped off, the third rider following. Sheriff Dawson lingered, his eyes moving between Tarek and Mara. "You've made an enemy today," he said quietly. "Silas Creed doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." "Neither do I," Mara said. The sheriff almost smiled. "Fair enough, but watch yourselves. And if he comes back causing trouble, you send for me. Understand?" "Yes, sir," Tarek said. "And thank you." Dawson nodded and rode off, leaving them standing in the yard. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Owen's grip on Lila's hand loosened, and he looked up at Mara. "Did we win?" he asked. Mara looked at Tarek, saw the grim determination in his eyes, and knew the answer. "Not yet," she said, "but we will." That night, after the children had finally fallen asleep, Owen clutching Lila's hand even in dreams, Mara stood at the kitchen window and watched the darkness beyond the glass. The confrontation with Silas played over and over in her mind, his face twisted with rage, the promise in his eyes that this was far from finished. She heard Tarek come up behind her, felt the warmth of him at her back. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I keep thinking about what the sheriff said, about Silas not forgetting." He was right. Silas won't let this go. Mara turned to face him. "Then why do I feel like we just made everything worse? At least when I was running, he couldn't find us. Now he knows exactly where we are. And now you have someone standing between you and him." Tarek's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "You're not alone anymore, Mara. Stop trying to carry this by yourself." "I don't know how to do that. I've been alone for so long." "Then learn. We've got time." But even as he said it, they both knew time was exactly what they didn't have. Silas would go to a judge, file his papers, come back with the law on his side. And when he did, Sheriff Dawson's protection wouldn't be enough. Mara closed her eyes and leaned into Tarek's touch. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Not for me. For Owen. For what happens if Silas wins." "He won't." "You can't promise that." "No," Tarek admitted. "But I can promise I will fight like hell to make sure he doesn't. And I can promise that whatever happens, you won't face it alone." Mara opened her eyes and looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd given them shelter when they had nothing, who'd stood against Silas without hesitation, who looked at her like she was worth protecting, worth fighting for. She didn't understand it, couldn't wrap her mind around the kind of goodness that didn't ask for anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, not for the first time. "What do you get out of it?" Tarek was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You want the truth?" "Always. I get to wake up in the morning and hear voices in my kitchen. I get to watch Lila laugh again, really laugh, the way she used to before her mother died. I get to sit at my own table and not feel like I'm drowning in silence." His voice dropped lower. "And I get to look at you and think maybe I'm not done living yet. Maybe there's still something worth building here." Mara's breath caught. She'd known Tarek cared, had seen it in the way he protected them, provided for them. But this was different. This was him laying himself bare, admitting that he needed them as much as they needed him. "Tarek, I'm not asking you for anything," he said quickly. "I know you're still healing, still figuring out who you are outside of what Silas made you. I can wait. I'm good at waiting. What if I can't be what you need? What if I'm too broken?" "You're not broken. You're surviving. There's a difference." His other hand came up to frame her face, and Mara felt the gentleness in his touch, the absolute certainty. "And even if you were broken, I'd still want you here, still want to help you put the pieces back together." Mara felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked up tight since the first time Silas had raised his hand to her. She'd spent so long believing she was worthless, believing she deserved the pain, that hearing someone say otherwise felt like standing in sunlight after years in darkness. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to trust someone. How to believe it's real. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time." And because she couldn't find the words, because everything she wanted to say felt too big and too fragile all at once, Mara did the only thing she could think of. She rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. Tarek went very still. For a heartbeat, Mara thought she'd made a terrible mistake, that she'd misread everything. But then his arms came around her and he was kissing her back, gentle and careful, like she was something precious he was afraid of breaking. The kiss was nothing like the one Silas had taken from her. Those had been about possession, about power. This was different. This was a question and an answer all at once, a promise spoken without words. When they finally pulled apart, Tarek rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Because you needed time. Needed to choose it for yourself." He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Did you? Choose it?" "Yes," Mara said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Yes, I did." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the night pressed close around the house. And for the first time in 3 years, Mara let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. Could have safety and warmth, and someone who saw her as more than just a thing to be used. The days that followed were strange, caught somewhere between fear of what was coming and the tentative hope of what was growing between them. Tarek didn't push, didn't demand more than Mara was ready to give, but his presence shifted from protective to something deeper, more personal. He found reasons to brush past her in the kitchen, to let his hand linger on hers when they worked side by side in the garden. And Mara, who'd spent so long flinching away from touch, found herself leaning into it, found herself seeking him out, standing a little closer than necessary, letting conversation stretch long into the evening after the children were asleep. The ranch began to change too. The garden grew stronger, the green shoots pushing up through the dirt with stubborn determination. Mara planted tomatoes and beans, squash and corn, her hands remembering the rhythm of this work from before Silas, from when she'd had a mother who taught her how to coax life from hard ground. Owen's arm healed completely, and with it came a confidence Mara hadn't seen in him since he was small. He started helping Tarek with the horses, learning to brush them down and check their hooves. Lila taught him the names of all the chickens and showed him how to collect eggs without getting pecked. The two of them became inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and inventing elaborate games that only they understood. Watching them together made Mara's chest ache with gratitude. This was what Owen needed, this normalcy, this chance to just be a child. And Lila bloomed under the attention, her loneliness falling away as she gained not just a playmate, but something that looked an awful lot like a brother. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after Silas's visit, Mara was preparing supper when Lila came running in, her face bright with excitement. "Mara, Owen says his birthday is next week." Mara looked up from the potatoes she was peeling. "That's right. He'll be 8. Can we have a party, please? We've never had a party before." The innocent request hit Mara harder than it should have. She glanced at Owen, who was standing in the doorway looking embarrassed but hopeful, and realized that in all the years with Silas, she'd never been allowed to celebrate her son's birthday. Silas had said it was frivolous, a waste of resources, so they just let the days pass unmarked, year after year. "I think a party is a wonderful idea," Mara said, her voice thick. Lila squealed and grabbed Owen's hands, already planning out loud. "We'll make a cake, and maybe Papa can take us to town for candy, and we can play games." Tarek appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. "What's all this about?" "Owen's birthday is next week, and we're having a party," Lila announced. Tarek's eyes found Mara's across the room, and she saw understanding flicker there. He knew what this meant, what it cost her to give Owen this simple thing that should never have been denied in the first place. "Then we'd better make it a good one," he said. 8 years old is important. The children ran off to plan, leaving Mara and Tarek alone in the kitchen. She went back to peeling potatoes, but her hands were shaking. "You all right?" Tarek asked quietly. "He's never had a birthday party. In 8 years, I've never been able to give him that." "You gave him something better. You gave him life. Everything else is just details." "Details matter. So give him this one." Tarek moved to stand beside her at the counter. "Let him have this party. Let Lila make it special. Let yourself enjoy it instead of feeling guilty about what came before." Mara set down the knife and looked at him. "How do you always know what to say?" "I don't. Most of the time I'm just guessing." He smiled slightly. "But I know what it's like to wish you could go back and fix things, and I know it doesn't help. All we can do is move forward." She nodded and went back to the potatoes. But Tarek stayed beside her, and after a moment he picked up a knife and started helping. They worked in companionable silence, the easy rhythm of two people learning to move around each other, and Mara felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. That night, after supper, Tarek pulled her aside. "I want to give Owen something," he said, "for his birthday." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but I want to." He hesitated, then said, "I was thinking about making him something, from wood, maybe a horse, something he can keep." Mara felt her throat close up. "He would love that." "You sure? I don't want to overstep." "You're not." She reached out and took his hand, squeezing it. "You're being exactly what he needs, what we both need." Tarek pulled her close, and Mara let herself rest against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. This was becoming her favorite place. Right here, wrapped in his arms, feeling safe and wanted and worth something. "I need to tell you something," she said into the quiet. "What is it?" "I'm starting to hope again. Really hope. And it scares me." Tarek's arms tightened around her. "Why?" "Because every time I've hoped for something good, it gets taken away. My mother died when I was 15. I married Silas because I thought he'd take care of me, and instead he broke me. I ran because I hoped we could find something better, and I almost died in the desert." She pulled back to look at him. "What if this is the same? What if I let myself believe in this and then it all falls apart?" "It won't." "You can't know that." "No," Tarek admitted, "but I can promise to fight like hell to make sure it doesn't. And I can promise that even if things get hard, I'm not going anywhere. That's the difference between me and everyone else you've lost. I'm choosing to stay." Mara searched his face and saw nothing but truth there. No lies, no hidden cruelty waiting to surface. Just this quiet man who meant every word he said. "I'm choosing to stay too," she whispered. "Good, because I'm not done with you yet." He kissed her then, and Mara kissed him back with all the hope and fear and desperate want that had been building inside her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tarek touched his forehead to hers. "We're going to be all right," he said. "All of us." And for the first time, Mara let herself believe it. The week leading up to Owen's birthday passed in a blur of secret preparations. Leela appointed herself the party planner, making lists and checking them twice, enlisting Mara's help with the cake and Tarek's for everything else. Mara watched her son's excitement grow day by day, watched him become more animated and open than she'd ever seen him, and felt something inside her heal. Tarek spent his evenings in the barn, working on Owen's gift. He wouldn't let Mara see it, said it was a surprise, but she caught glimpses of wood shavings on his clothes and the smell of fresh-cut mesquite on his hands. The night before the party, after the children were asleep, Tarek called Mara out to the barn. "I want you to see it before I give it to him," he said. "Make sure it's all right." He led her to his workbench and pulled back a cloth, revealing a carved wooden horse. It was beautiful, every detail lovingly rendered, from the flowing mane to the powerful legs caught mid-stride. The wood was smooth as glass, polished to a warm honey color. Mara picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was light but solid, perfectly balanced, the kind of thing that would last a lifetime. "Tarek," she breathed, "this is incredible. You think he'll like it?" "He'll love it." She looked up at him, her eyes wet. "This must have taken you hours." "Had the time, and I wanted it to be special." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "He's a good kid. Deserves something made just for him." Mara set the horse down carefully and moved into Tarek's arms. He held her close, and she breathed in the smell of him, leather and sawdust and something underneath that was just his. "Thank you," she said, "for all of this. For giving him what I couldn't. You've given him everything that matters. I'm just adding the details." "Maka." She pulled back and looked at him, this man who'd become so essential to her life so quickly, and made a decision. "I love you," she said, the words falling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it's fast and maybe I shouldn't say it yet, but I do. I love you." Tarek went very still. Then a smile spread across his face, slow and genuine and so full of warmth it made Mara's chest ache. "I love you too," he said. "Have for weeks now. Just been waiting for you to catch up." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and Mara kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we give your son the best birthday he's ever had. And then—" He paused, his expression turning serious. "And then we figure out how to make this permanent." "Permanent?" "I want you to stay, Mara. Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm helping. I want you here as my partner. My wife, if you'll have me." Mara's breath caught. "Tarek, I know it's complicated. I know you're still legally married to Silas, but we can fix that. Get a divorce. Make it official. And when we do, I want to marry you. Want to raise both kids together. Make this ranch into a real home." He cupped her face in his hands. "I want all of it. With you." Mara felt tears slip down her cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes to all of it." Tarek pulled her close again, and they stood there in the barn surrounded by the smell of wood and hay, holding each other and planning a future that felt almost close enough to touch. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a party. Lila was up before the sun, bouncing around the house and waking everyone else with her excitement. Mara made breakfast while Tarek went out to do the morning chores, and by the time he came back, the children were practically vibrating with anticipation. "Can we start the party now?" Lila asked for the 10th time. "Party starts after lunch," Mara said firmly. "We've still got to make the cake." Lila grabbed Owen's hand. "Come on, we have to help." The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Mara and the children made a simple cake, 2 layers with jam in the middle and sugar icing on top. It wasn't fancy, but it was made with love, and that was what mattered. Tarek strung up some bunting he'd found in the barn, and Lila picked wildflowers to put in jars around the house. By early afternoon, everything was ready. They gathered in the kitchen, the cake sitting proudly on the table with 8 candles stuck into the icing. Owen stood in front of it, his eyes wide and shining. "Make a wish," Mara said softly. Owen closed his eyes tight, his face scrunched up in concentration. Then he opened them and blew out all 8 candles in one breath. Lila clapped and cheered, and Tarek ruffled Owen's hair. "What did you wish for?" Lila asked. "Can't tell. Won't come true if I tell." But Owen looked at Mara, and she saw it in his eyes. He'd wished for this to last. For this family, this home, this feeling of being wanted and safe. They ate cake and played games, and when the sun started to set, Tarek brought out the wooden horse. He placed it in Owen's hands, and the boy went very quiet. "I made it for you," Tarek said. "Happy birthday, son." Owen's fingers traced the smooth lines of the carving, his expression awed. "You made this? For me?" "For you. I've never had anything this nice before." Owen looked up at Tarek, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, Tarek." Something shifted in Tarek's face when Owen used his name. He pulled the boy into a quick hug, and Mara saw him blink hard. "You're welcome," he said, his voice rough. Lila demanded to see the horse, and soon both children were on the floor playing with it, making up elaborate stories about wild stallions and frontier adventures. Mara and Tarek stood together, watching them, and Tarek's arm came around her waist. "This is what it should always be like," Mara said quietly. "Children playing, no fear, no violence, just this." "This is what it will be like," Tarek said. "I promise you that." That night, after the children were finally asleep, Owen clutching his wooden horse even in dreams, Mara found Tarek on the porch. The desert stretched out before them, dark and vast under a sky full of stars. "Best birthday ever," she said, settling beside him. "For him or for you?" "Both." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I never thought I'd have this. A home, a family, someone who looks at me the way you do." "How do I look at you?" "Like I matter, like I'm worth something." She turned to face him. "Like I'm not broken." "You're not broken," Tarek said firmly. "You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You left Silas. Walked into the desert with nothing but your son and the will to survive. You built a life here from scratch. That's strength, Mara. That's courage." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was giving her too much credit, but the truth was she had done those things, had survived when it would have been easier to give up, and maybe that did make her strong. "I want to start the divorce," she said, "as soon as possible. I want to be free of him legally, not just in my heart. We'll ride to town tomorrow, talk to a lawyer. What if Silas fights it?" "Let him. We've got right on our side." Tarek squeezed her hand. "And we've got each other. That's more than enough." Mara leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, and let herself believe it. They had each other. They had the children. They had this ranch and this life they were building together. And maybe, just maybe, that really was enough. The next week brought the first real cold of autumn. The desert nights turned sharp, and Mara started closing the windows after supper. The garden began to wither, the plants giving up their last harvest before winter settled in for good. Tarek rode to town and came back with news. He'd found a lawyer willing to take Mara's case, a woman named Elizabeth Garrett who had a reputation for being fair and fierce in equal measure. She'd need testimony, documentation, proof of Silas's abuse. But she thought they had a chance. "She wants to meet with you," Tarek said. "Next week. Are you ready for that?" Mara thought about it, about sitting across from a stranger and laying bare all the worst moments of her marriage. It would be painful, humiliating, hard, but it would also be the first step toward freedom. "I'm ready," she said. They made the trip together, leaving the children with a neighbor Tarek trusted. Elizabeth Garrett turned out to be a thin woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She listened to Mara's story without interruption, taking notes in neat handwriting. When Mara finished, Elizabeth set down her pen. "This won't be easy," she said bluntly. "Silas will fight. He'll claim you're lying, that you abandoned him. The law favors husbands, especially when it comes to children." "I know. But we have a few things on our side, the scars you showed the sheriff. Mr. Sable's testimony, the boy's preference to stay with you." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "And the fact that you didn't take anything when you left. No money, no property, just your son. That shows you weren't running away from responsibility. You were running for your life." "So what happens now?" "Now I file the papers. Silas gets served. He'll have 30 days to respond. After that, we go before a judge." Elizabeth looked at Mara steadily. "I need you to be prepared for this to get ugly. Silas will say things, try to make you look bad. You'll need to stay calm, stay focused on the truth." "I can do that." "Good." Elizabeth stood and offered her hand. "Then let's get you free." Mara shook it, feeling something like hope bloom in her chest. The papers were filed a week later. Mara waited for Silas's response with a mixture of dread and determination. Part of her expected him to show up at the ranch again, to make good on his threats. But days passed, then weeks, and there was nothing. "He's planning something," Mara said one evening. "Probably," Tarek agreed, "but until he makes his move, all we can do is keep living." So they did. They harvested the last of the garden and put up preserves for winter. They reinforced the barn against the coming cold and stocked up on feed for the animals. The children grew taller, stronger, more sure of themselves. And Mara and Tarek grew closer. They found rhythms and routines, learned each other's habits and moods. Tarek started sleeping with his bedroom door open so he could hear if Mara had nightmares. Mara started leaving coffee ready for him in the mornings, the way he liked it. It was domestic and simple and more perfect than anything Mara had ever known. One night, nearly 2 months after the papers were filed, Tarek came to her room. He stood in the doorway, his expression uncertain. "Can I come in?" Mara set down the shirt she'd been mending. "Of course." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of her bed, turning something over in his hands. When he opened his palm, she saw a bracelet, simple, carved from mesquite wood, polished smooth. "I made this for you," he said. "Figured you needed something that was yours, something that couldn't be taken away." Mara picked up the bracelet, feeling the weight of it. The wood was warm, the carving intricate. Tiny flowers and vines wound around the band, so delicate they must have taken hours. "Tarek," she whispered, "it's beautiful." "It's just wood." "It's more than that." She slipped it onto her wrist. It fit perfectly. "It's a promise." "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." Mara looked at him, this man who'd given her everything without asking for anything in return, and felt her heart expand with love so fierce it almost hurt. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore," she said. Tarek's eyes darkened. "Mara, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I want to wake up next to you. Want to know you're there." She reached out and took his hand. "Is that all right?" "Yeah," Tarek said, his voice rough. "That's more than all right." So he stayed. He held her while she fell asleep, his arms solid and warm around her, and for the first time in 3 years, Mara slept without nightmares, without fear, just safe and warm and loved. And in the morning, when she woke to find him still there, his eyes already open and watching her with tenderness, she knew she'd finally found what she'd been searching for all along. Home. Winter came to the Arizona territory like a whisper, cold nights that gave way to pale mornings, the desert scrub turning silver with frost. Mara woke each day in Tarek's arms, and each day the fear that had lived in her chest for 3 years grew a little smaller. The court date arrived in early December, exactly 30 days after Silas had been served. Elizabeth Garrett sent word that the hearing would be held in 2 weeks, and that both Mara and Tarek would need to testify. The children would stay with the neighbor again, kept far from whatever ugliness might unfold in that courtroom. "I'm scared," Mara admitted the night before they were set to leave for town. She and Tarek were in the kitchen, the house quiet around them, the children long asleep. "I know." Tarek pulled her close, his chin resting on top of her head. "But you're ready for this. You've been ready. What if the judge doesn't believe me? What if he sides with Silas? Then we appeal. We fight harder. We don't stop until you're free." Mara pressed her face against his chest and breathed in the familiar smell of him. "I keep thinking about Owen, about what happens if they make him go back. They won't. You can't know that." "No," Tarek said quietly, "but I can believe it. And so can you." She wanted to argue, but the truth was she did believe it. Against all logic, against every hard lesson life had taught her, she believed that tomorrow they would walk into that courthouse and walk out free. They left before dawn, the wagon rattling over frozen ground. The town was 3 hours away, and they spent the journey in silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Mara's hand found Tarek's on the bench between them, and he laced their fingers together without a word. The courthouse was a squat stone building at the center of town, imposing despite its size. Elizabeth Garrett met them at the door, her expression all business. "Silas is already here," she said, "with his own lawyer, a man named Thomas Wade." "Is he good?" Mara asked. "He's competent, but we're better." Elizabeth led them inside, her heels clicking on the stone floor. "Remember what I told you. Answer only what's asked. Don't let them bait you into saying more than necessary. And whatever Silas says about you, whatever lies he tells, you stay calm. The truth is on our side." The courtroom was smaller than Mara had expected, just a few rows of benches and a raised platform where the judge would sit. Silas was already there, seated at a table with his lawyer, and when Mara walked in, his eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He looked different, thinner, harder, with a desperation in his face that hadn't been there before. This wasn't a man confident in his victory. This was a man fighting to hold on to something he knew he was losing. Tarek's hand settled on the small of Mara's back, steadying her. They took their seats at the opposite table, Elizabeth between them, and waited. The judge arrived 5 minutes later, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He settled into his chair, shuffled some papers, and looked out over the courtroom. "This is a petition for divorce filed by Mrs. Mara Creed against Mr. Silas Creed," he said, his voice flat and official. "Mrs. Creed is also seeking sole custody of the minor child, Owen Creed, on grounds of abuse and neglect. Mr. Creed has filed a counterpetition denying these claims and seeking custody himself. We'll hear testimony from both parties and render a decision. Mrs. Garrett, you may begin." Elizabeth stood, her posture perfect, her voice clear. "Your Honor, my client fled her marriage 3 years ago to escape a pattern of systematic abuse. She took only her son and the clothes on her back. She asks this court to dissolve her marriage and grant her full custody of Owen, as returning him to his father would put him in immediate danger." She called Mara to the stand first. Mara rose on shaking legs and crossed to the witness chair, her hand briefly touching the mesquite bracelet on her wrist for strength. The clerk swore her in, and she sat down, facing the room. Elizabeth's questions were gentle but thorough. She asked about the marriage, about the first time Silas had hit her, about the escalating violence. Mara answered each question as honestly as she could, her voice steady even when her hand shook. "Can you describe the incident that made you decide to leave?" Elizabeth asked. Mara took a breath. "Silas came home drunk. I'd made supper, but it wasn't ready when he wanted it. He grabbed me by the hair and slammed my head into the table. Then he dragged me to the cellar and locked me in. I was down there for 2 days with no food, no water. When he finally let me out, I couldn't stand without help. That's when I knew if I stayed, he would eventually kill me." "And your son, did Mr. Creed harm him as well?" "He hit him. Not as often as he hit me, but enough that Owen learned to stay quiet and small, to disappear." Mara's voice cracked. "A child shouldn't have to learn that." "Thank you, Mrs. Creed. No further questions." Then it was Thomas Wade's turn. He stood slowly, his expression skeptical. "Mrs. Creed, you claim my client abused you. Do you have any proof of this abuse beyond your word?" "I have scars. The sheriff saw them. Scars that could have come from anywhere. A fall, an accident. They came from my husband." "So you say." Wade circled around to face her directly. "Isn't it true that you left your husband not because of abuse, but because you'd found another man? Mr. Tarek Sable, who's sitting right there." "No, I didn't even know Tarek existed when I left Silas." "And yet here you are, living on his ranch, sleeping in his house. Rather convenient, wouldn't you say?" Elizabeth shot to her feet. "Objection. Counsel is making assumptions not in evidence." "Sustained," the judge said. "Mr. Wade, stick to the facts." Wade smiled thinly. "Mrs. Creed, did you take anything when you left your husband? Money? Property?" "No, just Owen." "So you stole his son?" "I saved my son." "From what? A father who provided for him? Who had every legal right to him?" Mara felt her temper flare but forced it down. "From a man who saw him as property, not a person. Who would have raised him to be cruel and small and broken, just like himself?" Wade's eyes narrowed. "You speak very passionately about protecting your son, and yet you put him in danger by dragging him across the desert, didn't you? Nearly killed him with your recklessness?" "I did what I had to do." "You did what was selfish, what satisfied your own desires without thought to the child's welfare." Wade turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this woman abandoned her lawful husband, kidnapped his son, and shacked up with another man. She's an unfit mother and an adulteress. My client is asking only for what's rightfully his." Elizabeth was on her feet again. "Objection. Mr. Wade is testifying instead of questioning." "Sustained. Mr. Wade, do you have any actual questions for this witness?" "Just one." Wade turned back to Mara. "Did you or did you not engage in intimate relations with Mr. Sable while still legally married to my client?" The courtroom went silent. Mara felt every eye on her, felt the weight of the question. She could lie, could deny it, but she'd spent too many years living with lies. "Yes," she said clearly. "I did. Because Silas Creed stopped being my husband the first time he raised his hand to me. And Tarek Sable showed me what a real man looks like, one who protects instead of destroys." Wade looked triumphant. "No further questions." Mara stepped down, her legs weak but her head high. Tarek's eyes met hers across the room, and she saw nothing but pride there. Elizabeth called Tarek next. He took the stand with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything, his presence filling the small courtroom. "Mr. Sable," Elizabeth began, "can you describe the condition of Mrs. Creed and her son when they first arrived at your property?" "They were half dead. Mara collapsed in my yard. Owen was dehydrated, malnourished. Both of them looked like they'd been walking for days with nothing." "And what did you do?" "Gave them water, food, a place to sleep. What anyone decent would do." "Did Mrs. Creed tell you she was fleeing an abusive husband?" "Not at first, but I could see it, the way she flinched, the scars on her wrists, the fear in her eyes." Tarek's voice hardened. "I've seen enough violence in my life to recognize the aftermath." "And the boy? What was your impression of him?" "Scared, Quiet. The kind of quiet that comes from learning not to make noise because noise gets you hurt. Tarek looked directly at the judge. That child needed safety, needed a chance to just be a kid, and I was in a position to give him that. Elizabeth nodded. Thank you, Mr. Sable. Wade stood for cross-examination, his expression sharp. Mr. Sable, you're a widower, is that correct? Yes. Lonely, I'd imagine, raising a young daughter by yourself. I manage. I'm sure you do. And then along comes Mrs. Creed, a beautiful woman in need of rescue, rather like something out of a fairy tale. It wasn't like that. No? You expect this court to believe that you took in a married woman and her child out of pure charity? That you had no ulterior motives? Tarek's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. I took them in because they needed help, and I could provide it. Anything that developed after that was between two adults who chose each other freely. While she was still married, while she was still legally tied to a man who beat her bloody. There's a difference. Is there? Or is that just what you tell yourself to justify taking another man's wife? I didn't take anything. She gave herself freely, because she's not property, no matter what the law says. Wade smiled like he'd won something. No further questions. The judge called a brief recess, and Mara and Tarek huddled with Elizabeth in the hallway. That went better than I expected, Elizabeth said. How? Mara demanded. Wade made me sound like an adulteress and Tarek like some kind of predator. He tried, but you both came across as honest, as people who made hard choices for good reasons. Elizabeth glanced back toward the courtroom. Now we just need to hope the judge sees it that way. When they reconvened, Wade called Silas to the stand. He took his place with an expression of wounded righteousness, his eyes cast down like a man unjustly accused. Mr. Creed, Wade began, can you tell the court about your marriage to Mara? I loved her, Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. Married her when she was just a girl, promised to take care of her. And I did. Worked myself to the bone to provide for her and the boy. And how did she repay this devotion? By running off with my son, by spreading lies about me to justify it. Silas looked at Mara, his eyes hard despite the tremor in his voice. I never laid a hand on her in anger. Never. She was delicate, always getting hurt doing chores, and now she's trying to use those injuries against me. Did you ever strike your wife, Mr. Creed? No, sir. Never. And your son? Disciplined him when he needed it, same as any father. But I never hurt that boy. I love him. Wade nodded sympathetically. What do you think motivated your wife to leave? I think she met someone else. Think she got ideas about a better life and decided her vows didn't matter anymore. Silas's voice turned bitter. And when she couldn't find a legal way to break free, she made up stories about abuse. Turned my own son against me. Thank you, Mr. Creed. Your witness. Elizabeth approached the stand like a predator circling prey. Mr. Creed, you testified that you never struck your wife. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. Never? Not even once? Not even once. Then how do you explain the scars on her wrists, the medical testimony that they're consistent with being bound? I told you she was clumsy. Clumsy enough to bind her own wrists and lock herself in a cellar? Silas's face flushed. She's lying about that. Is she lying about the broken ribs too? About the concussion that left her seeing double for a week? Those were accidents. Accidents that happened how, exactly? Elizabeth's voice cracked like a whip. Spell it out for the court. How does a woman accidentally break 3 ribs? She fell down the stairs. You don't have stairs, Mr. Creed. Your house is 1 story. Silas faltered, his mouth opening and closing. I meant, she fell off the porch. Which version is it? Because you're changing your story. Elizabeth moved closer. The truth is, you beat your wife. Systematically. For years. And when she finally got the courage to leave, you came after her not because you loved her, but because you couldn't stand losing control. That's not true. Then explain why. When you found her at Mr. Sable's ranch, your first words were that she belonged to you. Not that you missed her. Not that you wanted her back. That she belonged to you, like a horse or a piece of furniture. Silas's hands clenched on the armrests of the chair. She's my wife. The boy's my son. That's just fact. And you think those facts give you ownership? Give you the right to hurt them? You locked your wife in a cellar for 2 days, Mr. Creed. You beat her until she couldn't stand. You terrified your own son so badly that he still flinches when men raise their voices. Elizabeth's voice was ice. You don't love them. You just can't stand the idea of anyone else having them. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. You're a coward and a bully, and this court should see you for what you are. Wade shot to his feet. Objection! Counsel is testifying. The judge raised a hand. Sustained. Ms. Garrett, do you have any actual questions? Just one. Elizabeth turned back to Silas. If you were such a loving husband and father, why did your wife choose to walk into the desert with nothing rather than spend one more day under your roof? Silas's face twisted with rage. Because she's a whore who wanted to spread her legs for Mr. Creed. The judge's voice boomed through the courtroom. You will control yourself or I will hold you in contempt. Silas clamped his mouth shut, breathing hard. Elizabeth smiled coldly. No further questions. The judge called another recess, longer this time. Mara sat in the hallway with Tarek, her hands shaking. He's going to lose, she whispered. Did you see his face? He's going to lose. Don't celebrate yet, Tarek said quietly. Judge hasn't ruled. But when they were called back in and the judge cleared his throat, Mara saw the decision in his eyes before he even spoke. I've heard testimony from both parties, the judge said, and I've reviewed the evidence presented. This is a difficult case, complicated by questions of law and morality that don't always align. He paused, and Mara held her breath. However, the facts are clear. Mrs. Creed bears visible scars consistent with her testimony of abuse. Multiple witnesses, including a sheriff and a medical professional, have corroborated her account. Mr. Creed, meanwhile, has changed his story multiple times and demonstrated in this very courtroom the kind of temper and contempt that lends credibility to his wife's claims. Silas half rose from his chair, but his lawyer pulled him back down. Furthermore, the judge continued, the minor child has expressed a clear preference to remain with his mother, and I see no benefit to forcing him back into a situation he fled. Therefore, I am granting Mrs. Creed's petition for divorce on grounds of cruelty. The marriage is dissolved effective immediately. Mara felt tears spring to her eyes. Beside her, Tarek's hand found hers and squeezed. As for custody, I am awarding sole custody of Owen Creed to his mother, with no visitation rights for the father pending a review in 1 year's time. If Mr. Creed can demonstrate genuine reform and a stable living situation, we may revisit this decision. But as of now, the child stays with Mrs. Creed. The judge's gavel came down with a crack that sounded like freedom. Silas exploded. You can't do this. He's my son. My blood. Mr. Creed, you are dangerously close to contempt. I don't care about your contempt. That boy is mine. Silas lunged toward Mara, and suddenly everything was chaos. Tarek was on his feet, moving between them, and the bailiff was grabbing Silas, wrestling him back. I'll kill you, Silas screamed at Mara. I'll kill you both. You hear me? You're dead. Mr. Creed, you are now in contempt of court. Bailiff, take him into custody. They dragged Silas away, still screaming threats, his voice echoing down the hallway even after the courtroom door slammed shut. Mara sat frozen, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. It's over, Elizabeth said quietly. You're free. And suddenly Mara was crying, great heaving sobs that she couldn't control. Tarek pulled her into his arms and held her while she fell apart, and through the tears she heard him murmuring, It's over. You're safe. It's over. They left the courthouse an hour later, papers in hand that declared Mara's marriage dissolved and her son legally hers alone. The winter sun was bright overhead, the air cold and clean, and Mara felt lighter than she had in years. What now? She asked as they climbed into the wagon. Tarek looked at her, his eyes warm. Now we go home. We pick up the children, and we start the rest of our lives. Just like that? Just like that. The ride back to the ranch felt different, faster, brighter, like the whole world had shifted into sharper focus. When they arrived, the neighbor brought out Owen and Lila, both children running to meet them. Did we win? Owen asked breathlessly. Mara knelt down and pulled him into her arms. We won. You're mine now. Legally, officially, forever mine. Owen hugged her so tight she could barely breathe. I don't have to go back? Never. You never have to go back. Lila grabbed Tarek's hand, her face anxious. Does this mean they're staying? Forever and ever? Forever and ever, Tarek confirmed. He looked at Mara over the children's heads. If they'll have us. That night, after the children were asleep, Tarek and Mara sat on the porch steps and watched the stars come out. The desert stretched before them, vast and dark, but no longer threatening, just peaceful. I want to marry you, Tarek said into the quiet. Properly. Soon as you're ready. I'm ready now. You sure? You just got out of one marriage. That wasn't a marriage. It was a prison. Mara turned to face him. This is different. You're different, and I don't want to wait anymore. Tarek pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band worn smooth with age. This was my mother's, he said. I was going to give it to my wife, but she died before I could. I'd like you to have it. Mara took the ring, feeling the weight of it. It was plain, unadorned, perfect. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit like it had been made for her. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Sheriff Dawson officiated, his wife served as witness, and the children stood between them, holding hands and beaming. There was no fancy dress, no elaborate celebration, just two people promising to love and protect each other, and two children gaining the family they'd always deserved. When the sheriff pronounced them married, Tarek kissed Mara like he'd been waiting his whole life to do it, and she kissed him back with everything she had. Owen and Lila cheered, and somewhere in the desert a coyote howled, and Mara thought she'd never heard a more beautiful sound. That night, in the room that was now theirs, Tarek held her close. Happy? He asked. Happier than I ever thought possible. Good, because I plan on making you even happier, every single day for the rest of our lives. Mara believed him. For the first time in her life, when someone made her a promise, she believed it completely. The winter passed in quiet contentment. Mara and Tarek learned to move around each other as husband and wife, finding new rhythms and routines. Owen and Lila became true siblings, bickering and laughing and protecting each other with fierce loyalty. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts, and when spring came, Mara planted the garden again, her hands sure and steady in the soil. One evening in late March, nearly a year after she'd first collapsed in Tarek's yard, Mara stood at the kitchen window and watched her family. Owen and Lila were playing by the barn, their voices bright with laughter. Tarek was mending fence in the distance, his movements easy and familiar. She touched the mesquite bracelet on her wrist, then the gold band on her finger, and felt gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. This was what she'd been searching for in the desert. Not just survival, but a reason to survive. Not just shelter, but a home. Not just safety, but love. Tarek came in a few minutes later, dusty and tired, and pulled her into his arms without a word. She leaned into him, breathing in the smell of sun and sage and everything good. I love you, she said. I love you too. Outside, the children's laughter rang out clear and bright, and the desert wind carried it across the land like a blessing. This family that had been cobbled together from broken pieces, from desperation and chance and the stubborn refusal to give up, they had become something whole, something real, and in a harsh land that took more than it gave, that seemed like a miracle all its own. Months turned to years. Owen grew tall and strong, learning the ranch from Tarek, becoming the kind of man who protected instead of destroyed. Lila bloomed into a fierce, bright girl who knew her own worth and never settled for less. And Mara and Tarek grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. The mesquite bracelet never left Mara's wrist. It aged with her, the wood darkening and smoothing, becoming part of her like the ranch itself. When people asked about it, and they did, because it was beautiful and clearly precious, she would smile and tell them it was a gift from her husband, a reminder that some things, once broken, could be made whole again. And on quiet evenings, when the children were grown and gone to build their own lives, when it was just Mara and Tarek on the porch watching the sun set over the desert they'd tamed together, she would turn that bracelet on her wrist and remember. Remember the woman who'd collapsed in the dirt with nothing left to lose. Remember the man who'd offered water and shelter and, eventually, his whole heart. Remember the choice they'd both made to stay, to fight, to build something lasting from the scraps the world had left them. And she would think, This is what love looks like. Not grand gestures or pretty words, but the daily choice to show up, to do the work, to protect what matters most. This is what home feels like. Not a place, but the people who fill it with warmth and laughter and the promise of tomorrow. This is what freedom tastes like. Not the absence of chains, but the presence of choice. The knowledge that you are valued, cherished, seen. The desert had tried to kill her once. Instead, it had led her here, to this man, this life, this impossible, perfect second chance. And that, Mara thought, as Tarek's hand found hers in the twilight, was worth every hard mile she'd walked to find it.